right, folks, buckle up because we're about to take a trip
Oh, yeah.
into the wild world of early Christian thought,
I like it.
a realm where fire and brimstone aren't just metaphors,
Right.
but the vivid reality of a text that'll make Dante's Inferno look like a picnic in paradise.
Oh.
That's right, we're diving deep into the apocalypse of Peter. I'm Harry Farry, your intrepid guide through this textual labyrinth.
Love it.
And trust me,
Yeah.
you'll want to hold on tight.
Okay. I'm Kimi, here to help navigate the scholarly twists and turns of this fascinating and, let's be honest, somewhat terrifying piece of ancient literature.
Right.
Because let's face it, who doesn't have a morbid fascination with the idea of eternal punishment, right?
So you're interested in this apocalypse of Peter thing.
Yeah.
Which isn't exactly light bedtime reading.
Nope.
And you're probably wondering why it never made it into your Sunday school curriculum. Well, let's just say it's not exactly filled with fluffy clouds and harp-strumming angels. And it might have given those early church fathers a bit of a theological heartburn.
Yeah, I can imagine.
This text, written somewhere between 100 and 150 AD, paints a picture of heaven and hell so vivid, so detailed, it would make Michelangelo blush.
Wow.
And it raises some pretty profound questions about justice, mercy, and the whole point of being a good person in a world that seems to reward the wicked.
It's like peeking behind the curtain of early Christian anxieties and seeing how they wrestled with the same big questions we still ponder today.
Absolutely.
What happens after we die?
Yeah.
Is there really a cosmic scorecard tallying up our good deeds and misdeeds? And if so, what's the exchange rate on, say, a white lie versus a particularly juicy gossip session?
Okay, so before we get into the nitty-gritty of soul-searing punishments and the heavenly spa treatments for the righteous, let's start with the basics, the text itself.
Yeah, good idea.
We're talking about a document that survived centuries, tucked away in dusty tombs and hidden within collections of forgotten manuscripts.
Right.
A real-life Indiana Jones adventure, just waiting to be unpacked.
And like any good archaeological dig, we have to sift through layers of history to get to the good stuff.
Yeah.
Starting with the fact that we actually have two main versions of the apocalypse of Peter.
Okay.
A shorter Greek version, the Cliff Notes, if you will.
Right.
And a longer, more elaborate Ethiopic version, which really gets into the gory details.
Okay.
I think director's cut with extra special effects.
Right.
Both of these versions, though, are believed to be based on an even older, now lost original written in Koine Greek, the lingua franca of the Eastern Mediterranean back in the day.
Imagine that. A lost original text, the text, so to speak.
Right.
Whispering secrets from the past. And the scholars are practically drooling over the possibility of one day stumbling upon it in some forgotten corner of the world. But even with the versions we do have, it's like piecing together a puzzle with half the pieces missing.
Right.
Trying to figure out who wrote this thing.
Yeah.
What their motivations were and why it became so popular in early Christianity, only to be ultimately excluded from the official canon.
The authorship question. Always a delightful mystery when it comes to ancient texts.
Right.
Especially those claiming to be penned by famous figures.
Exactly.
In this case, the Apocalypse of Peter, as you might guess, claims to be the work of the apostle Peter himself.
Right.
Which, let's be honest, is about as likely as finding a unicorn in your backyard.
Good point.
Scholars call this pseudepigraphal, meaning it's attributed to someone famous, but was actually written by someone else trying to lend their work a bit of extra credibility.
Makes sense.
Think of it as the ancient equivalent of name dropping.
So we've got a mystery writer on our hands?
We do.
Someone channeling the voice of Peter, but who?
Yeah, who?
And why go through all the trouble of faking it?
Well, one clue lies in the text's historical context, which seems to point towards a period of intense persecution for early Christians.
Right.
Possibly around the time of the Bar Kokhba revolt in the 2nd century AD. The apocalypse is full of condemnations against those who falsely accused and martyred Christians.
Oh, wow.
Suggesting that the author might have been writing from a place of deep fear and anger. Using the apocalyptic genre to express their anxieties and perhaps even offer a vision of ultimate justice for the persecuted.
So imagine this, a Jewish Christian, maybe living under Roman rule, witnessing the brutality of persecution, and turning to the pen, or rather the quill, to create this stunningly vivid vision of divine retribution.
Right.
A way of saying, hey, The wicked will get theirs in the end, even if it takes an apocalypse to make it happen.
It's a powerful message, and one that would likely resonate deeply with a community facing such hardship. But before we delve into the specifics of those punishments, let's zoom out and consider the overall structure and narrative arc of this apocalyptic masterpiece.
Right, because we need a roadmap for this journey through the afterlife, or else we'll get lost in the theological weeds, and trust me, those weeds can be pretty thorny.
Oh, yeah.
So where does this story begin, and what's the basic plot line?
Well, picture this. The disciples are gathered with Jesus on the Mount of Olives.
Okay.
A fitting setting, considering the apocalyptic theme.
Makes sense.
And they're peppering him with questions about the end times, those juicy details everyone wants to know. What are the signs? When is it all going down?
Yeah.
And most importantly, who gets front row seats to the cosmic fireworks?
I see.
And Jesus, being the ever-patient teacher, launches into this epic, detailed account of what's in store for humanity after his return.
The sequel to the greatest story ever told. And this time it's got special effects that would make Hollywood drool. But let's back up a bit before we get to the main event, the second coming. Doesn't the text also describe Jesus' ascension to heaven?
Absolutely. And it's not just a quick fade out into the clouds.
Okay.
The apocalypse of Peter actually paints a rather intriguing picture of this ascension. Drawing parallels to the Transfiguration, where Jesus appeared with Moses and Elijah, heavy hitters of the Old Testament. In this vision, we see Jesus ascending to heaven, flanked by these two prophetic figures, solidifying the connection between the Old and New covenants.
I see.
And hinting at the continuity of God's plan across history.
Okay, so we've got the prequel with the ascension, the anticipation building to the signs of the second coming, and now we're ready for the main event.
Yes.
The return of Christ in all his glory, ready to judge the living and the dead.
Okay.
But let's be honest. What everyone really wants to know is what happens next, right?
Exactly.
Who gets the golden ticket to paradise and who gets stuck in the cosmic waiting room with nothing but fire and brimstone for company?
You read our minds, Hari. That's where things get really interesting, and we'll dive into those juicy details right after.
Well, right now. All right, strap yourselves in, folks, because we're about to venture into the depths of hell.
Oh, boy.
As envisioned by the author of the Apocalypse of Peter. And let me tell you, this isn't your grandma's fire and brimstone.
Okay.
This is a bespoke, tailor-made hellscape where every sin gets its own personalized punishment, a kind of divine justice with a touch of karmic irony.
So it's not just a one-size-fits-all eternal barbecue. We're talking about a multi-level, all-inclusive resort of suffering with the punishment package for every taste.
Exactly. The Apocalypse of Peter operates on the principle of mirror punishment, or lex talionis, as the fancy Latin folks call it.
Okay.
Which basically means an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, and a tongue for a particularly nasty bit of gossip.
Oh, ouch.
The idea is that the punishment fits the crime, often quite literally with a focus on the body part that did the sinning.
Okay, I'm morbidly curious. Give us some examples.
Look, the kind that make you want to check your moral compass and maybe invest in some extra strength mouthwash.
Well, let's start with those who love to embellish the truth, shall we? Liars find themselves with their lips sliced off. A rather drastic way to cure a case of verbal diarrhea, wouldn't you say?
I guess so.
And those who dared to blaspheme, to utter insults against the divine majesty, they're hung by their tongues.
Jeez.
A poetic punishment that might make even the most eloquent orator think twice before spouting off.
So much for freedom of speech in the afterlife, huh? It seems like the Apocalypse of Peter is big on nonverbal communication. Maybe charades was a popular pastime in early Christian communities?
Could be.
But I have to ask, were there any gender-specific punishments? I mean, we're talking about a text written nearly 2,000 years ago, so...
You've hit upon a rather sensitive topic, and one that reflects the social anxieties and gender roles of the time.
Okay.
Adulterers, for instance, receive punishments tailored to their biological sex. A detail that's both fascinating and, let's be honest, a bit cringeworthy from a modern perspective.
Okay, I have to know. Spill the beans.
All right.
What kind of punishments are we talking about here? Don't leave us hanging.
Well, let's just say those women who use their beauty to entice men into adultery find themselves suspended by their hair over a boiling pit of muck.
Oh, yikes.
Their once alluring tresses now a source of excruciating pain. And the men who succumb to their charms, well, they're hung by their genitals right beside their female counterparts.
Oh, my God.
Their lustful desires quite literally turned into a source of torment.
Ouch. Talk about a cosmic cock block. It's amazing how these punishments, while brutal, also reveal a lot about the cultural norms and anxieties of the time, especially around female sexuality and the perceived threat it posed to social order.
Precisely. And speaking of societal anxieties, let's not forget those who violated one of the most deeply held taboos of the time, infanticide and abortion.
Right.
The Apocalypse of Peter doesn't hold back in its condemnation of these practices.
Reserving a particularly gruesome punishment for women who committed such acts.
Oh man, this is where things get really dark, isn't it? What does the text have in store for these women?
Imagine this. A pit filled with excrement. A truly degrading and suffocating image.
Oh, God.
And these women are submerged up to their necks in this foul substance.
That's awful.
Forced to confront the consequences of their actions in the most visceral way possible. But it gets worse.
Really?
To add insult to, well, injury, the souls of their aborted or murdered children appear before them.
Oh.
Their tiny eyes shooting forth flames.
Wow.
A haunting reminder of the lives they took.
Wow, talk about a punishment that's both physically and psychologically agonizing. A double whammy of guilt and suffering.
Yeah.
It really underscores the deep-seated fear and condemnation surrounding these practices in early Christian communities, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And it's not just these specific sins that get the personalized treatment.
The Apocalypse of Peter goes all out in its creative punishments, ensuring that every transgression from petty theft to grand larceny gets its due.
So it's like a cosmic catalog of punishments, a veritable smorgasbord of suffering with something for everyone, or rather every sin. I'm almost afraid to ask, but what about more mundane sins like gossiping or envy?
Oh, those aren't overlooked either. Those who slandered their neighbors or doubted God's righteousness find themselves gnawing on their tongues for all eternity.
Oh, no.
A fitting punishment for those who misuse the power of words.
It seems like tongues get a pretty rough deal in the Apocalypse of Peter. I'm starting to think silence is golden, at least in the afterlife.
Maybe so.
But what about sins of a more economic nature, like greed or exploiting the poor?
Well, remember those rich folks we mentioned earlier?
Yeah.
The ones who lived in luxury while ignoring the plight of the less fortunate? They're in for a particularly humbling experience.
Okay.
Stripped of their finery, forced to wear rags and endure the piercing agony of burning stones driven into their flesh.
Well,
It's a stark reversal of fortunes, a reminder that earthly wealth doesn't buy you any favors in the afterlife.
it's like a cosmic version of Eat the Rich, except in this case it's more like Burn the Rich with really hot rocks. But what about those who didn't necessarily break any commandments but still caused harm through their actions, like those who persecuted Christians or betrayed their friends?
Don't worry, the Apocalypse of Peter has them covered too.
Okay.
Persecutors and betrayers find themselves half consumed by flames cast into a pit of darkness where a monstrous worm feasts eternally on their entrails.
Oh, God.
A rather graphic depiction of the torment they inflicted on others.
Yikes. It's like a cosmic horror movie playing out in the afterlife.
It kind of is.
But it's interesting how these punishments go beyond just physical pain.
Right.
They also reflect the deep understanding of psychological suffering, the kind of torment that comes from betrayal, guilt, and the realization that your actions have eternal consequences.
Exactly. And this psychological dimension is even more apparent in the punishments meted out for sins related to false beliefs and idolatry.
Oh, yeah. What happens to those folks who worship the wrong gods or sculpted graven images? Do they get sent to a cosmic timeout corner?
Well, it depends on which version of the Apocalypse of Peter you're reading.
Okay.
In the longer Ethiopic version, they're whipped with fiery scourges.
Okay.
A rather straightforward punishment that emphasizes the pain of straying from the true faith.
Right.
But in the shorter Greek version, their punishment takes on a more ironic twist.
Oh, interesting.
They're forced to beat each other with fiery rods, their own creations, those idols they so painstakingly crafted, now turned into instruments of their own torment.
Wow. That's a powerful image.
Yeah.
It's like they're trapped in the cycle of self-inflicted suffering.
Mm-hmm.
A reminder that our choices, even our artistic endeavors, can have unintended consequences, especially when they lead us away from the true path.
It's a sobering thought, isn't it? And one that brings us to a rather intriguing question. Amidst all this talk of fire, brimstone, and eternal torment,
Yeah.
is there any room for hope, for redemption,
Right.
even for those who find themselves on the wrong side of the cosmic fence?
Yeah, because with all these vivid descriptions of hell, I'm starting to feel a bit anxious myself. Is there any chance of parole? A cosmic get-out-of-jail-free card? Or are we all just doomed to eternal suffering if we mess up?
It does make you wonder if there's any wiggle room
Right.
in this divine justice system. Any chance for a last-minute appeal?
Mm.
Or maybe a plea bargain with the cosmic prosecutor? I mean, even the most hardened criminals get a chance to plead their case, right?
Well, that's where things take an unexpected turn.
Okay.
A glimmer of hope amidst the inferno, if you will.
All right.
The apocalypse of Peter. Despite its graphic depictions of hell and its emphasis on just desserts.
Right.
Also hints at a possibility of redemption.
A sort of backdoor escape hatch from eternal damnation.
Wait, hold up.
Yeah.
Are we saying that even those folks getting their tongues scorched and hanging by their, what's, might have a chance to trade in their fiery pitchforks for harps and halos?
Okay.
That's a pretty radical idea.
It is.
Especially for a text written so long ago.
It is radical. And it speaks to the theological ferment of early Christianity.
Right.
A time when different interpretations of scripture and the afterlife were being debated, sometimes quite fiercely.
Okay.
Remember that early fragment of the Apocalypse of Peter we mentioned earlier?
Yeah.
Well, it suggests that the righteous, those basking in the glory of heaven, might actually have the power to intercede on behalf of the damned.
Oh, wow.
To petition God for their release from torment.
So it's like a cosmic bail bondsman situation, with the saints putting in a good word for those stuck in the infernal slammer. That's a pretty comforting thought, even if you're not particularly saintly yourself.
It is comforting, and it raises some fascinating questions about the nature of divine mercy and the possibility of post-mortem repentance.
Oh, wow.
Is God's judgment final and absolute?
Yeah.
Or is there a chance for a change of heart?
Right.
Even after the curtain falls on this earthly stage.
Whoa, we're getting deep here. Talk about existential angst. But it makes you wonder if the author of the Apocalypse of Peter was leaning towards a more universalist view of salvation. The idea that ultimately everyone gets a chance to make things right with God, even if it takes a bit of extracurricular suffering in the afterlife.
It's a possibility.
Okay.
And it wouldn't be entirely unique in the context of early Christian thought.
Right.
Remember Origen, that brilliant, albeit somewhat controversial theologian from the 3rd century?
Yeah.
Well, he actually argued for the eventual reconciliation of all souls with God.
Okay.
A concept known as apokatastasis.
I see.
Which basically means restoration to the original state.
Okay.
While Origen's ideas were later deemed heretical by the church, they showed just how diverse and fluid early Christian beliefs about the afterlife were.
It's mind-blowing to think that nearly 2,000 years ago, people were already grappling with these same questions about the nature of God, the limits of divine justice, and the possibility of second chances, even in the afterlife. It makes the Apocalypse of Peter, with all its wild imagery and bizarre punishments, seem almost contemporary, a reflection of our own enduring struggles with faith, doubt, in the mystery of what lies beyond.
Exactly. And it reminds us that these ancient texts, even those filled with fire and brimstone, are more than just historical curiosities. They're windows into the human soul, into our deepest fears and longings. And they offer us a chance to engage in a dialogue across centuries with those who came before us, to learn from their struggles, their insights, and their hopes for a world beyond our comprehension.
So even though the Apocalypse of Peter didn't make the cut for the official biblical playlist, it's still a powerful piece of music. A symphony of terror and hope. A reminder that the human imagination, when confronted with the vastness of eternity, can create visions both terrifying and strangely beautiful.
And who knows, maybe those vivid descriptions of hell weren't meant to scare us into submission, but rather to inspire us to live more compassionate, just, and meaningful lives here and now. To strive for that heavenly reward, not out of fear of punishment, but out of a desire for true communion with the divine.
A powerful thought indeed. Well, folks, there you have it, the Apocalypse of Peter. A whirlwind tour through the afterlife, complete with personalized punishments, a chance for redemption, and a whole lot of theological head-scratching.
We hope you've enjoyed this deep dive into the depths of early Christian imagination.
I know I have.
And maybe, just maybe, it's inspired you to reflect on your own beliefs about life, death, and the meaning of it all.
Until next time, stay curious, explore those dusty old texts, and remember, even in the face of eternal fire, there might just be a glimmer of hope waiting to be discovered.